See when it says live. It says we're live now, and we're live. Mike Cernovich, thank you for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
All right, now I'm gonna preface this with an introduction, and then I'm going to explain to everybody who's watching the discussions we've had before this, because I didn't send Mike any of the questions. He doesn't know what I'm going to ask him. I did run 2 subjects by him just to make sure that I'm not going to ambush him by dealing with one subject which we cannot avoid, and I'm trying to find the comment to bring it up right now, and another subject which is touchy because it involves his mother, and I want to make sure that I'm not overstepping bounds, even if it is public knowledge to some extent. First things first, I'm just going to say thanks for the super chat, Richard Sprague. As much as I can bring up the super chats as we do this live, I'm going to do it, and with the question that I know that we're going to have to answer because it has been there. Where was it, Mike? We saw this when we were getting ready. All that to say, here. No, it was not Richard Sprague. Where was the comment?
I'm looking for it on either. I see somebody complaining that I blocked him on Twitter.
We'll get into all of it. No, so look, I can't find the comment. The obvious. We're going to get into this. I told Mike we cannot have a credible legal discussion without addressing what everybody knows. If you Google Mike Cernovich, you'll find it. I'm going to have to say the words during this stream: the rape tweets, the choking during sex comments made in an interview, the rape charges from 2003. We're going to get into all that because we can't have an honest discussion without addressing it to get where we need to go. And the preface to this, to set up the context, I'm like a newbie in some respects. I'm some silly Canadian who's discovered YouTube. I don't know I don't know everything. I know a lot of stuff and I'm in tune with things, but not everything. And so how I got to meet Mike was up until a month ago. I don't think I knew Mike Cernovich's name, certainly not his face, and nothing about him. At one point on Twitter, someone retweets or tags me in a tweet and says Viva Frei to a comment about someone saying there's a great YouTube law channel from somebody out of Canada. Check it out. And then I made a joke. I don't think the person's talking about me. And then sure enough, Mike Cernovich retweets or tweets again later. Viva Frei's got a great law channel. I go look up Mike Cernovich. I learned some stuff. I see some controversy, but which was mostly surrounding conspiracy theory stuff. But then I see that Mike Cernovich is actually the person who made the motions to unseal the Epstein documents, which led to the rearrest and which led to everything that we now have in the media. And first correction, it was not a FOIA request, but we'll get into it. Freedom of Information Act. It was a motion to unseal, which is similar but different. So all that say, I didn't know Mike's, call it baggage. I didn't know his internet baggage. I didn't know his internet history. I since learned about it, especially after I announced that I was going to do the live stream. By and large, reactions were great. I say by and large, it was like 99% positive reactions, and I got some emails saying, "Don't do this. He's a scumbag. Check out his tweets from a while back. Check out his comments, etc., etc." And I saw what I saw. There's an article in the Wrap that really, Mike, I don't know if you know the article in the Wrap. They go. It's an exhaustive inventory of your tweets. It seems to be all of them with the comments. Thank you very much, Renzo Talara. It seems to be all of your comments your tweets, which we're going to get to. So I then found out about that, and I said, "Look, Mike, we can't have the discussion without addressing this because no one's going to take it seriously, and it's all on the table." I told Mike I'm not going to ambush him, and I'm not here to hang him up to dry, but I'm not here to let him off the hook either. So that is how this came to be. Mike said he would do this live stream, and I've got legal questions, but we're going to do the thing we always do in live streams: start with Mike, get to the elephant in the room, and then get to the law. Mike, is that good with you?
Yeah. Like I said, I'm just this stuff always cracks me up because I've been, in 60 Minutes before 11, 12 million viewers, been written about, profiled. The new book came out about me. It's kind of a very weird thing. And what I find most interesting about the internet is how do you say it? The story of you is always like a kaleidoscope. So you have somebody who, I found about you through X, therefore you are X. Or I found out about you through Y, therefore you are Y. And it leads to a lot of caricature. So for example, people always be like, isn't it true that you are charged with rape? And I'm like, well, yes. How do you know that? you talked about it. I'm like, yes. The only reason that anybody actually knows that, because the charges were dismissed, my record was fully expunged, so there's literally no record of it anywhere, is because I talked about it openly. And then people try to, and you're not doing this specifically, but then people are like, this, I'm like, yeah, you literally heard about that from me. Like, I broke the own story about myself. And then they're like, they try it like to be like a gotcha thing. I'm like, no, I've actually been open about it. I've talked about my experience with like due process and how it works and how like the legal system works out. So it's just always very, and again, this isn't addressed to you. This is just more kind of like meta commentary.
Don't worry, I'm not sensitive anymore.
Yeah. Okay, good. So it's just this bizarre meta commentary about the internet where people are like, isn't this true? And I'm like, well, I mean, you know it because I told you. So obviously, if I never wanted anybody to know about it, then I never would have talked about it. Now, the flip side to that is, there's like it's like a class of troll that it just gets like tedious. You're like, oh my God. Like whenever I do a talk, for example, they have their phones out. I'm like, oh my God. Like I already know what you're going to ask, and you're going to line up and ask something I've talked about 100 times, 1,000 times. But then meanwhile, and this is what I find most interesting about, quote unquote, cancel culture, is if you tell them, well, why wasn't Roman Polanski banned from Hollywood? What do you mean? What aboutism? It's like, no. And this is why the conversation with you, I think, will be more interesting than most people. That's why I don't do a lot of streams with people, is what people call whataboutism is actually what you learn in law school, the Socratic Method. So if somebody comes after you and says, well, there's X, Y, and Z, then I'm like, well, okay, if X, Y, and Z, the rule is you can't say X, Y, or Z. Then if I present to you an ideological ally who has said X, Y, and Z, will you apply that same standard to them as you would apply to someone else who isn't an ideological colleague? And of course, then they go, well, that's whataboutism. You're like, no, it's literally just saying if there are any actual sincere rules. And what I've learned on this journey is that there's actually no objective rules to cancel culture. So people go, oh, Cernovich, you said this. I'm like, well, sure. Jink of the Young Turks, they have said lots of really bad things, but people will watch the Young Turks and they get like wound up over me, and YouTube will sponsor them, and then like everything's good. And then if you try to bring that up, then people say, well, that's whataboutism. So that's just a very long way of saying I don't mind the conversations. After a while, it just gets kind of tedious because people are just disingenuous. They won't apply. The best example of this is I always tell people, read the articles about Mike Cernovich and James Gunn. And James Gunn, they're jokes though, right? He talks about pedophilia and, raping children, literally. I mean, they're all there in the tweets. But then if you read the articles will say, oh, Mike Cernovich weaponized outrage against James Gunn. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Why is it manufacturing outrage to point out tweets that a leftist has tweeted out, but it's not manufacturing outrage to point out tweets that somebody viewed as right wing have tweeted out? Well, I've always found that interesting.
Okay, well, and we'll get there because we have to. But the obvious answer is going to be you're not saying I'm innocent and I regret it and I apologize. You're saying, why are you picking on me because someone else did it as well, which is not going to be a satisfactory answer to anybody. There may be double standards in the outrage, but it doesn't mean that both people go unpunished. It just means that perhaps both people should go punished. But if only one's getting punished, you can't really exonerate yourself by saying the other person's not getting equal punishment. But
that's the court of law, right? Which is different than, like, you can't tell the cop, well, hey, cop, everybody's speeding. And he's like, well, I've heard that 100,000 times. But it's more along the lines of, if people want to cast moral judgment on others, then why do they believe they're in a position to cast moral judgment on others if they're not willing to apply that same moral standard to everyone else? And yeah, and the flip side to that is that the hypocrisy does matter and should matter, because if you're in a court of law, you just say, isn't it true? You pull out everything. Isn't it true that this? Has anybody else had access to your Twitter account? If so, who's, there's like 100 things you do. And that, of course, is quite different than when it's just this like hive mind or mob trying to apply some kind of amorphous standard to human behavior that they don't apply to themselves or to anyone else on their side. So it isn't a way of saying, well, everybody's done bad things, therefore nothing should matter. But the flip side is that if people are truly outraged because they're moral and just and virtuous, then why do they only seem to be mad at people viewed as conservative or right wing?
Okay, well, we'll get there and we'll delve into that more when we get there. But starting from the beginning now, you're not from California. You said you were, I think I know where you're from Wikipedia and from what you mentioned earlier, but where are you from?
I am from a small town in Illinois.
And how many siblings do you have?
I have an older sister, 4 years, I believe, and 2 younger brothers.
And so if I can ask the very personal questions, family on speaking terms, do you keep in touch with your siblings?
Complicated. So my younger brother did 12 years in prison for shooting his meth dealer, which is a story in and of itself. And my older sister and I have a quite good relationship. We don't talk frequently. And my youngest brother is just kind of doing his own thing. So it's a weird thing where there's an estrangement, but not due to any kind of falling out or bad blood necessarily.
Okay. And your parents alive, no longer alive?
My father is alive and well, very happy. And my mother is alive and not well. She's actually in a mental institution where she will almost certainly die.
And okay, so that's something else. I looked, Wikipedia said that your mother battled mental illness and was institutionalized during your childhood. What schizophrenia, bipolar, manic depression?
Yeah. Back then it was called manic depression, and now it's called bipolar. Her mom was schizophrenic and lived out her final days in a mental institution. It's quite sad for a number of reasons. Everybody, as they get older, cognitive decline becomes a risk. And if you have a pre-existing serious mental condition, once that intercepts with, age-related cognitive decline, it just gets really messy.
And now, when did your mom first have mental? Like, when did she first get institutionalized? When did she first start experiencing mental illness?
Sure, she had, before I had a recollection of this. My older sister has a recollection of this. She had a very so manic depressive or even bipolar is doesn't do the disease justice. It's actually quite a terrifying condition because it comes with paranoia. So people think, oh, you're manic depressive, you're really amped up one day. No, you actually start to have delusions, really severe paranoid delusions. And my sister remembers my mom having a paranoid delusion, and my mom was going to kidnap my sister. But then the school bell alarm went off, and then my mom thought that was the police were coming to arrest my mom. And then she panicked, and she ended up in an institution. But I think that was before my time, before, childhood memory, whatever happened. And then for me, the first time I encountered her having a real problem was she went into another episode. She quit taking her medication, and then she literally kidnapped my brothers, and I wasn't there, so she couldn't have kidnapped me. I was with a friend, so I just come home, and it's kind of like you're walking in and you're just like, oh yeah, your mom took your brothers. I'm like, what? And so she had another episode or delusion, so she kidnapped my brothers and stayed with the friend. And then the friend, realized, okay, this is like, for lack of a better word, an insane person. It's one thing somebody says, oh, I'm having problems, can I stay with you? And you're like, oh, okay, sure. And then you realize, okay, this is like an actual mental condition. And then my mom was then sent to a mental institution where I visited her. So I was, I think, somewhere between 11 and 13, old enough that probably before junior high, grade schoolish. So whatever age people are when they're in grade school, that would be the age band. And
so you basically grew up as of that point without a mother?
No, she came back. She came back. She got, so what happened is she quit taking her medication because I grew up in a very, we went to home churches. The religious environment is very hard to describe, and I lived it, and they're hard to describe. But my mom believed that she was possessed by demons, and that's what was causing the mental illness. So we were in a home church and people prayed over her and spoke in tongues and cast the demons out of her. And then because the demons had been cast out of her, therefore the mental illness had been cured. And so because of that, she quit taking her medication at the time, which they weren't that good anyway. At the time, it was before Seroquel. It was just lithium was what she would take. And it was kind of lithium or nothing. So she quit taking her lithium. And then within 48 hours, just all hell broke out.
I mean, okay. And I'm reading through the comments while we're going, and people are asking why I'm asking this. I think, first of all, whether or not, I'll be frank, I will get to the tweets, and I don't agree with anything in them. And I think there's issues, and I think ultimately, you recognize that as well. But people are asking why I'm asking this. I think it's important to understand who somebody is, first of all, just in general, whether you love them or hate them. And, regardless, it's important to know someone's life history to understand where they are and why they are where they are. I have my own theories as to whether or not this has any influence or had any influence on who you became. Okay, so and then growing up, what happens? Your mom's in and out of an institution. Your dad is managing the family.
Well, no, then she came back, and then she was a stay-at-home mom. So she did, she didn't have like a lot of energy, but she was, quite a nice person. Quite a good person. So never abusive. My father was never abusive at all either. And yeah, she returned home, and she was mainly in very lengthy, they would call them high cycles and low cycles at the time. So for her, she would just have maybe 2 or 3 hours of kind of energy throughout the day. And then that was like kind of it. So she would, maybe sleep until 11 a.m. and, get up and clean the house a little bit, and, maybe do dinner or something else. But she was, she was quite a nice person. And yeah, I guess for those people asking, about this and why we're talking about it, and, and you mentioned who I became or whatever, it's always interesting because there's, one of the sort of mythos about me is that I'm this like angry, unstable guy. And I always just say, well, I'm 42. I have a wife, 2 kids, consistent track record of like objective achievement. But that goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is you kind of get a sliver of a person or of a persona, which is often performative. And that's never actually checked as to, the objective reality. So a lot of people say, oh, you have mom issues. It's like, no, actually, I feel quite bad for my mom because she was, I don't like the word victim, but mental illness is horrific. There's no other way to put it. Like when people, there are things that I don't usually do. I usually don't joke about people, having mental illnesses because I've seen it, and it's tragic, really. It's your whole life is you're either you have no energy and you're kind of drained, or you go into these manic phases where you become completely disconnected from reality and become just paranoid about anyone and everything around you. It's actually it's quite sad.
And so one question I always ask myself is, when a dad has a heart attack at 62 and the kids all grow up thinking 62 is my time limit, I'm going to have a heart attack or die at that age too. How much of your siblings fear the imminent or potential onset of mental illness because of its?
That's a great. No, that's quite frankly, that's a great question. My sister was quite worried about it, and I was worried about it too. Usually, bipolar develops before you're 25. So I was definitely a sigh of relief was breathed by my sister as she got a little bit older, and certainly as I got a little bit older too, I was like, okay, I sort of have passed the danger zone. But yeah, there's always that kind of specter of that, especially when you're having your own children. I think about, my mom's mom was institutionalized for schizophrenia, and my mom's institutionalized. What's the genetic component of it, and everything else. So it's serious stuff. And by the way, I'm reading some comments to my own thing, and they're like, they think it's intrusive, but I always find that interesting how, and this probably goes to what people are used to. It's people, we saw this. I don't know if you watched the videos today of Don Jr. on The View.
Yeah, I saw
people
it.
Are used to just, and I enjoyed it. I enjoy this fun, but people are used to either kind of a glib, contrived conversation or a very adversarial one where like you're trying to checkmate me and I'm like checkmating you. But I don't know. That's probably why I don't stream with people much. I find that kind of stuff boring.
No, well, and we're gonna get there incidentally, because having not known you from before a month ago and now seeing what you did in the past, some people will never forgive. Others are going to say people never change. And then others are going to say, well, I can see a willingness to change, but there's no willingness to apologize or make amends, but we'll get there still. So,
but
okay.
Apologize to who, though? I guess that goes back to the original thing is, apologize to who? If I tweet it out,
Mike, we'll get there.
No, but there really is, like, what am I going to apologize to this mob you're so upset with?
But Mike, because I don't want to get ahead of the. Let's get to the tweets, because they're all going to come together here.
Right.
You go to law school. What do you study before law school? Real quick.
Okay, so fast forward, I joined the National Guard, Army Reserves, and do community college, and then transfer to college, do philosophy / pre-law, and then move out from Illinois to California for law school.
Okay. So you get your law degree in what year?
So a good question. That's one thing you notice. How old are you?
I want to pair it with the with the rape charges.
Okay. So no, but the reason I bring that up is when I was like 25 and I would read about people, being indicted for perjury for getting a date. I'm like, how could you not know if it was 1 year? I'm like, I'm 42. I don't know. 2004-ish, 2005-ish. Okay, somewhere everything becomes like we'll call it early to mid 2000s.
Okay, well, let's say let's get right into the rape charges. 2003. Are you in law school when this happens, or is this before?
So I was charged, and so the allegation was made in 2001, and then I was charged in 2013.
2013.
No. I'm sorry, 2003.
Okay, so your allegations from 2001. Charge in 2003. The charge is, I don't know much about criminal law, but the charge is rape. It's not it's not a
criminal sexual assault would be the technical charge. Yeah.
Okay. And was it dropped? Was it reduced in a plea bargain, or was it?
It was dismissed, and then all the underlying arrest was expunged. But the timeline is confusing because the allegation was made in 2001 before I went to law school. So we just said, okay, we'll do a polygraph, we'll do a lie detector, we'll do whatever we need to do. But I need to know, like, am I going to move to California? And then they blew us off for 2 years, literally. And then is the summer before my third year of law school. And they're like, well, we're going to go forward with it. And so it just became, litigation for a number of years because, and as you know, depending on what side of the case you are, delays, if you in a criminal situation, criminal allegations, delays always benefit the defense. And if you're a plaintiff, that's why if you're in a civil lawsuit, plaintiffs always want to push the pace and they want to get to trial right away. So yeah, fundamentally, ultimately the charges were dismissed, record was expunged, and I was doing lawyer things before that, and doing lawyer things a little bit after that, but then. Because what a lot of people don't know too, you wouldn't know this either, is I was a published constitutional law scholar, and that can all be verified and everything. And I just sort of been like, I'd see friends burn out. One friend I took to the hospital, we thought he had a heart attack, heart palpitations, 33 years old, very physically fit, like no gut or anything. I just said, I don't think that I want to do this grinding like litigation thing. And then I just kind of moved on to a trolling phase, provocative phase, shock phase, call it what you will.
Okay. And then well, let's say maybe one or two more questions, because charges were dismissed after a trial, or
no charges. The case never went to trial. It was dismissed, and Kobe Bryant's case, for example, charges were dismissed.
Did the accuser withdraw the charges?
The prosecution dropped the charges. Yes.
Okay, was there a plea bargain? Because they're
trying, because people are trying to say that I pled it down, I pled guilty to something, and I've always said, go find the records because they don't exist. So that became part of the mythos. So then people said, well, so they've said a number of things. One is they said that I hired a private investigator to intimidate the woman. And that's not true. I hired a private investigator to interview an eyewitness because I don't know how deep into the case you want to get into, but I was literally in the room with her and another girl. So we got an interview with the literal other woman who was in the room at the same time. And she said, I heard them making out, like nothing happened. I don't believe this. So we had all this, evidence and information. And that's why, the case drug on because, they didn't want to drop it. And I wasn't going to plead guilty for a number of reasons. One is principle, but you start to lose your, just fight it to the end when it's dragging on, but also like moral character evaluation. So I don't know how it is in Canada, but if you plead to any crime in California, then that comes up in moral character. So then you essentially have to go through another moral character trial. Then I said, so I'm not going to go through that. I'll just grind it out. But if you get your record expunged, which I did, then you don't have to go through that like excruciating, tenuous, uncertain moral character and fitness evaluation. So yeah, they say I tried to harass someone. It's like, no, I hired a private investigator to interview an eyewitness. The private investigator never talked to the other people because we had an eyewitness. And then they say I pled guilty to a crime. And I'm like, well, no, I didn't. And proof of that is licensed attorney, state of California. There's a whole moral character process that you have to go through. But it's just one of those things. And it just once there's a narrative, it's just kind of hard to shake off. And I've become namaste about it.
And well, this is the issue. Like, I'm not going to go into this any further, primarily because there is an accuser in this. Also, people don't appreciate that these things are tried in courts and they shouldn't be tried in public opinion. Now, and that's not to say that you shouldn't form an opinion. And I have my own opinion. It's irrelevant. I'm sure people in the comment section, they'll listen to you. They'll come to their own opinion. But the fundamental unfairness about actually trying to treat this like a criminal trial in public is it's not fair to anybody. It's not fair to the accuser and it's not fair to the accused. And expunged is expunged. I had to ask my fellow lawyer friend what that exactly means. And it means that it was typically not a serious conviction if there was one, and then the record is wiped clean, which typically doesn't happen with certain types of crimes. People, on the other hand, and we're getting into it now, are going to put all of this stuff together. You have this rape charge, you have these rape tweets, you have this choking comment about sex, and you have a theory on male, what do you not misogyny, but rather male feminism or the anti-feminism, and people are going to make their own opinions, and there's probably going to be very little you can do to convince them otherwise.
Which I think is interesting. Ties in nicely for like a lot of reasons, which is that there is so there's, and by the way, just to play devil's advocate. So yeah, the fact that my record was expunged, because this is what lawyers do, could mean that the legal system just doesn't take it seriously, right? It could just mean I was completely innocent, or it could just mean the legal system pre-Harvey Weinstein just didn't care. And that's what a lot of people will say. And as far as being like a court of public opinion being tried, I think that if you're a public figure, as I am, and that I put things about my life out in public, then I can't be like, well, how dare people, try me. Now, broadly speaking, that would be the exception. It's absolutely horrific where people will read one story about a person who isn't a public figure and then think they know all about the case, when, as there's, you look at a case file, you can't just get one or two sentences out of there about that. So yeah, I don't have a problem with the
like the flip side is some people think the expungement had to do with prosecutors not taking it seriously. In today's day and age, people are going to take the expungement potentially like a Jussie Smollett, where we know that there's two tiers of legal systems, so people can swing either way with that depending on what they want. I think, anyways, it's interesting. We live in a world where we have, whether or not you divulge it voluntarily, probably would have come out at some point. People talk, especially the more famous or infamous you get, people talk. The accuser might have come out, her friend might have come out, so you get the one up by telling the story yourself. But you don't control a narrative, and you can't control the information, and people come to their own conclusions, and they also put a pattern of conduct together in order to assess the person. So you get your law degree. Did you ever practice as an attorney?
I did law and motions work and, a ton of like appellate briefs and appellate works. I kept my name off of things just because by the time, you reach a certain level of prominence and, it's not necessarily good for the client to necessarily have to bring in, that kind of baggage. So yeah, I did publish legal scholarship, had a very successful legal blog before there were vlogs, which you have. I had a blog picked up by law.com, Crime and Federalism, that was quite like narrow and nuanced. We talked about, a lot of the issues actually coming up in Trump now, constitutional power, separation of powers, the federalization of criminal law, a lot of kind of wonky stuff I was, sort of into. Section 19.3 litigations, the government, So, my legal research and my legal scholarship has actually been cited in federal judicial opinions in the United States. And so I was a very kind of just sort of buttoned up, I don't want to say boring, but
well, no, lawyers are not lawyers when they're exciting lawyers. It's not always a good thing, but so you get your law degree, give or take 2005, 2006. You practiced privately for how many years, give or take?
Oh, I mean, I was doing consulting probably as far as like a year or two ago. Like I still do consulting on legal cases as they come up in my niche. So there's, business litigation, breach of contract, defamation, free speech, constitutional litigation, excessive force cases against the government, ton of criminal stuff. Just a ton of, every crime, literally from murder to just to BS, small kind of stuff.
Now we're going to get into the tweets. I don't know what existed before Twitter. And first of all, actually, if I remind everyone now, tweet this out because I don't know how well the notification system is going to work given the title of this live stream. But if everyone could tweet this out and remind everyone what's going on. Look, before Twitter, did you have that type of personality in your public discourse through whatever the other means were before Twitter?
No, I was very it was like legal analysis and like legal scholarship. I mean, I can send you old articles, which is very much, like a book review I did actually for the Federalist Society years ago on Judge Napolitano's book on like government abuse and surveillance and everything. So I was probably, again, boring wouldn't be the word, but it was just all I wrote about really was the law. I was just very interested in, wonky legal issues, civil rights, and all that kind of stuff. See, I didn't have any real public persona. Okay.
So when do you start making these tweets on Twitter? Well, the tweets, the rape tweets. It's one of the ones that comes to mind right now. Try to rape someone with their consent.
That's the most misunderstood. Yeah. So the most misconstrued tweet of all time is that I'm advocating date rape. So
or to put it fairly, denying or minimizing date rape.
Sure. So they say, which is both counterfactual, and here's why. You can pull up a jury instruction right now, and a jury instruction for a criminal case, and all rape requires an element of force. And the argument that Susan Estrich had made in a book called Real Rape, which is where this thinking was, is there's no, like, you don't say there's date murder. You don't say there's date whatever. But then with when it comes to sexual assault, you say there's thing that's called date rape. Well, calling something date rape is actually not taking it seriously. If it's rape, it's rape. Rape is just rape. And if you say, well, it was date rape, you're actually, that's why, again, Susan Estrich, feminist legal professor at USC, wrote a book, which I read, called Real Rape, is you would just say all rape is rape, and rape should be treated as a very serious crime. The way you always put it is that if you were walking down the street and you saw someone raping someone, you would take a baseball bat to that guy's head. You wouldn't treat it as anything other than a very serious actual thing. You treat it very seriously. So when you create this category of behavior, you do two things. One is you minimize truly what it is, right? Rape is just rape. And then two is you have this kind of thing, Reason Magazine published this article like regret is not rape, where somebody says, well, it felt kind of weird the next day, so I'm not really sure, it might have been this thing called like date rape. So everybody in that situation loses, because now men are being, generally speaking, women commit sexual assault too, are being have this horrific thing applied to them. And then people who actually have are actual victims, there's this, again, this treating it like a gray area.
Okay, so I'm not even playing devil's advocate. I'm just going to tell you what I think here. First of all, Twitter brings out the worst in everybody, and I think I'll say it straight up. I think looking at your tweets, it's either brought out the worst in you, just like everybody else, or you do it for the what's the word I'm looking for? To be edgy, to be shocking, to get people listening, so that you can then say what you want to say. The problem with this, the first thing is that rape involves an element of force in law. Yes. Now, when you say that, when you're undermining date rape, and it would be the situations where someone gets too drunk and is unconscious. There's no element of force in the sense that you're describing, but there is an element of force in the law, and that's typically what people generally understand as date rape, as opposed to the alternative. And it is, and by tweeting something like that, the nuance which Twitter does not allow, which is what you want to give post facto, is not there. It's not there. And then I guess the question is not just for you, but why anybody puts these tweets out there on highly sensitive issues, knowing how easily they can be misinterpreted or interpreted the way they prima facie interpretation, and knowing the trouble that it gets people into. I mean, I guess
don't know though, but that's another sort of, sorry, I'm trying to
don't worry.
Phone here. Phone's dying, but that's actually the best point that you're making is in 2011 on Twitter, people were like making crack. People were, celebrities got in trouble. Kevin Hart got in trouble over tweets. James Gunn tweeted about pedophilia. Now, so what happens is that in 2011, people would just literally tweet the most insane thing that they possibly could think of. And that was the culture. And now if you're new to the internet, you might think, well, that's, so two things would come to mind. One would be, well, that's insane. And two is, well, yeah, I mean, culture is often insane. Two is, well, that's just bullshit and you're trying to retcon it. But you can empirically show that was the culture, because people are like, oh my God, I can't believe, have you seen this tweet from like 2009 from people like James Gunn? Like, say for example, why would an A-list Hollywood director ever quote unquote joke about pedophilia?
No,
he wouldn't.
First of all, I mean, I'm not a newbie in the sense that I saw Twitter then, and I'm I guess lucky in that I always thought three times before tweeting something, and I never, even back then people were doing it for the shock value, and they were doing it, and maybe obviously the moral code or the moral social code was different. I think a lot of people would say it still wasn't right back then, but that's how people got off, especially the edgier comics, the edgier personalities, not necessarily the lawyers, not necessarily people who don't have that liberty that Kevin Hart has. Because incidentally, I'll express more of an opinion than I've ever expressed. I don't think it was fair to hold Kevin Hart to that, only because they are comedians, and if you don't like it, don't follow them. Like, I listen to Howard Stern, and I understand how people could find it shocking. And I'm actually sort of surprised that Howard Stern doesn't get into more trouble given what he said compared to what happened to Don Imus. But stand-up comics, film directors, edgy people who thrive on that. PewDiePie's the guy there who made a joke about having sex with his cat. Someone's going to remind me what his name is. Okay, but lawyers should not have should have better judgment to some extent. They should be held to a different standard, even back then and especially now. And this is where I'm getting. This is where I'm ultimately going. Is I saw you on Rubin, the Dave Rubin recently, the one you sent me, and I genuinely got the impression that you want to apologize for these things, but that you are sort of stuck in this black hole of the same cancel culture that you've been exploiting for so long, where you know that people don't accept the apologies. They just hold them over people's heads. So there's no point in anybody apologizing. Correct.
Yeah. People say, why don't you apologize? And I go, well, apologize to who? Somebody who was offended by tweets when I had 40 followers And if the tweets are so bad, why does the media keep saying, oh, read these tweets, they're terrible, that somebody, tweeted shocking. Two is I never, I was not tweeting as a lawyer. I was just tweeting as, it was just, there were, the original Twitter avatar was like an American Express black card with a revolver or something. It was like a highly, it was just like a Supremo, like douchebag kind of thing. It was actually meta commentary and satirical. And so people go, why don't you apologize? I'm like, well, I mean, apologize to who? Apologize. Because I've personally, and I'll tell you, I've personally apologized to people. There's a CNN reporter called K-File, Andrew Kaczynski, and things got a little more heated than they should have. And people were, very mean to him based on, an impression that I created. And I didn't realize all that was happening. And I literally apologized to him and said, dude, I didn't mean for this to happen. That was really shitty of me. And then I publicly apologized to him because that was an individual wrong. I just said, look, I never should have, I didn't realize that it was going to be interpreted this way. That was just a nasty thing to do. And so I apologized to him personally, but apologizing to a mob, all it does is makes you look weak. This has been proven actually scientifically now. A study just came out a couple days ago that when you apologize publicly, which is what people say publicly, people then they just want to take more of a pound of flesh out of you. So I tell them, like, if I could just say, hey, let me explain everything I've ever said. And, some of it was satire. Some of it was poorly worded. Some of it was actually, quite frankly, 50 Shades of Grey has sold 250 million copies. So when people say, well, you wrote an article about choking during sex, I'm like, okay, yes, 50 Shades of Grey sold 250 million. So that's just false sanctimony, because that's just kink. So, okay, you're not into a certain kind of kink. That's just bullshit. That one there, I'm like, people are just lying, because I know what people are doing. I know what people are reading, and I know how many page views a lot of that stuff got. And I know that the demographic of that was actually women. Over 3.5 million people read that article. 60% of them are women. So with that one, that's just to me like false sanctimony.
Well, and incidentally, Becca, so the person one of the people who commented, and I said, send me the links. I would like to see what it is that allows everyone to say this. I said, look, I know that that's going to be your response. And I wouldn't be surprised if I heard a porno actor on Howard Stern, for example, talking about the exact same thing that I heard you talking about. I know what it makes me think of the person. I know what it makes me think of. I mean, I know what it makes me. I know what it makes me think. I know what my guttural reaction is, but then I know what the logical response the person would give is, and I could sort of, yeah, fine. And people are into kinky stuff. I would not expect. I would think twice if I found, if I heard. Just to apply the litmus test equally, if I heard Don Lemon a recording with that, I would my eyebrows would go up with Don Lemon just as much as it went up when I heard it with you, and then the question, it just goes back to the judgment and then the overall assessment of character when you put all these things together. I mean, ultimately, you probably do not blame any of the people who think what they think of you. I mean, I imagine.
I've literally said this. Like I've said over and over that if people have a perception of me, then I give them the right to do it, because there's layers to it. So one is everybody has a filter, and you create a story of a person. Well, Mike Cernovich holds himself out as a journalist, but have you said all these other things? And it's like, well, okay, so you mentioned Don Lemon. I would wager that he has a very interesting, and as a matter of fact, I know this for a fact because I know somebody who has been in situation. Let's just say he has a very interesting life.
There is a lawsuit. There's a lawsuit involving allegations. I don't know if did they file a suit against Don Lemon, but there's actually a sexual assault allegation against Don Lemon, which is interesting because I get crucified for alleged tweets, because I call them alleged because Joy Reid has some quite awful tweets and blog posts, and she claimed that she was hacked and that the FBI was investigating it. So I would say, well, why should I be evaluated by a higher standard than an MSNBC anchor? Now, you would say that's too clever by half, and because I respect you, I wouldn't play little bullshit games like that. But that's fundamentally where I am. I'm like, well, Don Lemon, there's actually a recent sexual assault complaint against him,
And that doesn't get brought up. But boy, Mike Cernovich, in August 11, 2012, if you've seen the zinger, we better just keep bringing that up, even when he's breaking stories and doing all these other things. And that, again, goes back to why I just don't apologize. I'm like, well, if you want to cancel Don Lemon based on allegations made against him, corroborated, by the way, because there was complaining.
One of the employees and the boss.
Yeah, so now, do I believe it? No. It sounds to me, quite frankly, like bullshit. But the allegation, has been made, and nobody's like, oh, we got to get Don Lemon, but boy, they get fired up about me. And so, but again, that's a very long way of saying that a lot of people are going to read things about me and not like me. And what I learned is that I can spend all of my time trying to convince people that they should like me, or I could just become very like namaste, accept that people aren't going to like me, and focus more on impact and going forward and, doing other things. And people are going to believe what they're going to believe and create a story about you based on, again, like what you do, for example, is you would say, well, you were a lawyer in 2011, therefore you shouldn't say X, Y, and Z. And I would say, well, sure, if I'm in court or I'm dealing with a client, like I shouldn't. But, why is it that if you're like, I'm a lawyer, you therefore can't, broach certain subjects? And that's because we create and filter. I mean, we filter.
No, forget the lawyer. I just say, if you don't want to come off as an a-hole in life, don't post a-hole tweets. I mean, that's the bottom line.
I don't anymore, though. But that's the whole point, though. People are like, well, you tweeted these things. I'm like, when I had 40 followers and everybody knew that we were just saying like moronic things or shocking things or whatever, just being idiots. I mean, if people go, you were a big douchebag, I'd be like, I mean, guilty as charged. I was like a complete total douchebag. And I don't have any problem with people making that assessment about me. But that said, it doesn't go to the credibility of what I've done recently or what I
did. That's where I want to get to. Let me just address some super chats that I don't think I did. Curious, can rape be performed by trickery? Think Revenge of the Nerds, the Vader scene, would that fall under it? I mean, yes, that's the bottom line. I know that much from criminal law. And the scene in House Party, Animal House. Sorry, not House Party. The scene in Animal House, which is the infamous scene where the girl passed out.
And then law school, the hypo of the dad, the twin brothers. She's with her husband, but it's her twin brother. And I mean, you go into that and, the hypotheticals of legal. But yeah, under the law, it certainly is. And I think what they're trying to really get at, though, is they're saying, well, if it's trickery, are we still using force? And that's an edge case. And that's an edge case that you could spend a whole class discussion on.
Well, there was the case where I remember from our criminal law system, which was I think the husband and wife were into bondage and kinky stuff and blindfolds, and then she didn't know that the husband was letting a friend do it, and it was I think that was one of the case law that we studied. Jeff Roberts, I am addressing super chat in as much as I can remember to get to them. I hope I didn't miss anything. Enjoy free money from YouTube. Love you, Viva. All right. Okay. And now, Mike, I mean, that's ultimately, first of all, I don't agree with the not apologizing. And I think that that's a cop-out, but I don't think it's a cop-out. I actually just think that you are a victim of the very same game that you wanted to play, but now you want to get out of because you realize it is mutually assured destruction, where you wanted to rake everyone, other people over the coals for their tweets.
No, you have causation backwards, actually. So, and this is a good point. So people say, yeah, I'm not a victim of the game that I played. What happened to me was I'm just like, what are you talking about? People would bring up tweets. I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about, right? And then they became stories written about in publications. And then I was like, oh, so wait a minute. People who are like trolling shock jocks in 2011 can have that drudged up. Well, okay, I'll go look at James Gunn's tweets, and I'll go look at reporters' tweets, and I'll go look at everybody's tweets. To me, I would be no better if we could end up cancel culture. I just realized they were going to do it to me. And as a lawyer, you apply that Socratic reasoning, and you're like, okay, so here's the game. Here's the rules of the game. So if people are going to essentially litigate against me aggressively, actually, quite frankly, and unfairly in many cases, then I'm going to litigate against them. So I had no idea what a public shaming was until it started happening to me. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to look at your stuff then. And then what we found out is that it isn't just mean Mike Cernovich who's got, said some really dumb shit or, evil or whatever however people want to characterize it. 2011, a lot of people were saying it. A lot of people were saying worse, including Joy Reid, including James Gunn, including, like a number of people. So I get I get what you're saying. I'm just saying that causality is reversed. The only reason I ever started investigating other people's social media is because they did it to me first. Now that doesn't justify, this is a different thing.
No,
but
I understand. I don't agree. I don't buy into it as a technique, because the bottom line is, I agree. You don't apologize for certain things because that it's I don't know what the expression is, kowtowing, but you don't apologize for the sake of pacifying the mob, but you do apologize when what you did was objectively wrong. And in which case you're not apologizing to the mob, you really are apologizing to yourself so that you can then move on from it. But this is
you can't. There's no, I apologize today and then I move on. There is no. I mean, I know the game well enough that there isn't any, but quite frankly though, and then the flip side to that is that, despite having been canceled, I mean, I'm recognized in public. I hold big events. Like, I'm quite well known enough that, people who don't like me and they see you tweet me and it's like you have a huge Twitter. So like I've achieved enough prominence, despite being canceled, that is all sort of a very, how do you say it just, to me, you just heard about me and therefore I'm kind of this character, right? So your perception of me is based on the recent slice of time and space, but the truth is that I mean, this kind of sounds, this is the douchebag in me coming out, but like I'm quite prominent, quite recognized.
But Mike, with the Epstein,
been canceled.
No, well, first of all, no, you haven't. And the rest, look, the rest is going to be up for everyone to assess what they think of you on a personal level. The one thing I say I'm optimistic, and I'm always, I see the bright side, and I've said this in some of my videos. Being a lawyer, knowing what of your private life has been made public, I know of like parents at my kids' school. Like I know stuff. As a lawyer, you learn stuff. You know what everyone does behind closed doors, and so it's not a question of condoning anything of your tweets. Or I have my own personal opinion about them, and I don't think it is ever too late to apologize. Much like I hypothesized in my Jussie Smollett video, but like as a lawyer, what people are doing behind closed doors, and you tend to view the world differently after that. I'll end it with that. But I think,
and for the record, I don't, and this is the number one thing I tell people who like me. I always say, don't ever think you have to defend anything that I've allegedly said, because I don't. I'm not here defending, like, I can't believe, I'm not, if I tweeted something like that, I would enjoy the public hanging that I would most likely, receive. So it's just a matter of, there's no like apology board where you can give your apology and then the mob will move on. People, they don't move on. They definitely don't. And all it does is just makes you look weak. And so I guess the answer to that is, so
I'm just going to say, I have to disagree with you on that. I actually think stubbornly refusing to apologize when what you did was objectively wrong makes you look weaker. But this is what makes people different. I still think Jussie Smollett could apologize if it could be remotely sincere and I say forgive but never forget, and he'd have to do a hell of a lot of rebuilding to get any credibility back. But no, I think apologize when it's sincere, when you've done something wrong, and then that's it.
Alex Jones he's apologized. We just said his name. I hope that doesn't kill you.
Oh, forget it. I have minimal hopes for this video.
So he has actually apologized for Sandy Hook many, many, many times over the course of years. And his apology is quite sincere, which is, I didn't realize, I was just talking about ideas. I didn't think that people would harass the families of parents of dead children. And so he's apologized, and Joe Rogan twice, apologized when the Megyn Kelly thing came out 2 years. He's tripped over himself apologizing. And so the rules are different, and you learn to recognize this when you're a lawyer. They're different if you're on the left or you're on the right. Jussie Smollett doesn't even have to apologize. The media doesn't care. They've moved on for that. Big hoax, nationwide hoax. The media, they've never apologized for what they did to the Covington Gate kids. smearing a 15-year-old. They still call them racist. They still say these kids are awful when the kids were actually blameless. So if you're Jussie Smollett, you can say, I'm sorry. And the media will say, we love you and you're a great guy. And it was so brave. They'll go, your apology was so brave. Tears in my eyes. But if you're a conservative or viewed as right wing, they're just the media. You're just not going to get that ever. And I would love to be empirically proven wrong, but I've just seen it time and time again. I mean, Donald Trump apologized for the Pussygate video, and they still bring it up. Can you believe it? This is awful. This is terrible. It's like, he said he was an idiot, shouldn't have talked like that. Didn't realize, call it locker room talk, but they're not going to accept. And by they, and again, this is why, I enjoy talking to lawyers and people who watch your channel are a little more philosophical than average, is like, you did this video on, I'm going to have Mike Cernovich on. I'm worried about getting canceled. If I'm like, well, canceled by whom? There's no them, this one person, it's this like hive mind, this like collective, this amorphous kind of thing that we can all sort of feel, but there's no head of it. There's no person who's like, hey, I apologize. Can everybody sort of, move past that?
There's no question the apologies get weaponized. It's all been weaponized, but there's still a question of, I don't want to say, I'm not using the term decency, but there's still a question of being true to oneself. And you make stupid tweets, which are insensitive, callous. Apologize. I don't know how many times you apologize. There's cultural, things they say, apologize 3 times. And if they don't accept the apology, it's their fault, whatever. But I'm not as fatalist in that I think if you do something wrong, you apologize once, twice, and then that's it. I agree. But let me just address this one, which is Maggie Smith. Thank you very much. Re Epstein, can one file for FOIA to get the ICS report that's nationwide? Okay. And there was one other super chat, which I'm going to have to read. Soy Ocean, thank you very much. Free Julian Assange, Edward Stone, and Kim. There's a lot of Kim.com. A lot of these, that's funny. We haven't heard from Julian Assange in a while.
Yeah. Okay. So, and this can maybe, if we want to segue into like the Epstein things and the nuance of,
I think 56 minutes. And anybody wants to footnote, timestamp this. The first hour, people complain about it, but I do like I like people to get to know who we're talking to. And now we're going to get into the substance, the thick of this. So explain to me first of all, explain to everybody the difference between FOIA and motion to unseal.
Right. So the FOIA is the Freedom of Information Act, and it's a open records law, or a sunshine law. A lot of they're called sort of shorthand, which says that people have the people at an individual level have the right to review and access government documents. You have an access to obtain that information, and if you file what's called a FOIA request, FOIA request, then the government has to give you all documents that are responsive to that request, subject to certain kind of exceptions. So, for example, if you FOIA a case file of somebody under FBI investigation, they're not going to give it to you because under the law, they don't have to give it to you because that could interfere with a pending investigation. So FOIA requests, BuzzFeed, they're quite good at them. There's a guy, Jason Leopold, who does a bunch of them. He's got a huge trove of them today. They actually won a big FOIA request case, CNN and BuzzFeed together yesterday, the day before, to where they said, we want to know everything about Trump's dealings with whatever country, and the government has to give you those. That's quite different than what I did, because the FBI had already released a trove of files that were subject to FOIA requests, agents' notes, but there's just tons and tons and tons of redactions. So what I did to get the Epstein records was quite elegant and quite sophisticated, and has caused a lot of confusion.
Can I stop you before you even get there?
Yes.
Legal interest. What legal interest do you have to establish for a FOIA request?
Correct. That if you're a citizen of the United States, you have a legal interest. It's just it's subject to the law. If it's paperwork subject to law, that's exactly great. And I'm glad you bring that up, because that's relevant to the next part of the conversation. All right. So you have to have a legal interest in America, case of controversy. So if Viva and his wife are in a lawsuit, I can't just say, hey, I want in on this. I need to find out what's going on here, whatever. They would say, well, you don't have legal standing to do anything. Like, what's your legal standing, right? And that's the rule of the general rule. So what happened in the Epstein case, and I use Epstein as sort of a metonym for the case itself because Jeffrey Epstein was a party to it, but indirectly. The primary case was a defamation lawsuit brought by Virginia Roberts versus Ghislaine Maxwell. And Ghislaine Maxwell is the person who's been accused of procuring young women for Jeffrey Epstein. Her name has been in the news a lot, but 3-4 years ago, nobody really knew who she was. She was a socialite and, quite popular, whatever. So Virginia Roberts and a few other women accused Ghislaine Maxwell of being essentially a madam for Jeffrey Epstein. Madam's not the right word because they were trafficked, but I'll just call her, she was an accused pedophile madam for short. And she said, no, I'm not. You're lying. That's fraud. Ordinarily, under the law, there's it's called the exculpatory no doctrine. So if you say, oh, you're a murderer, I usually have the right to say, no, I'm not a murderer. But if my denial is specific enough that I'm accusing the person who accused me of fraud, then they can file a defamation lawsuit under the theory that I'm impugning their good name and their reputation by calling them a fraud. So that's what happened. Ghislaine Maxwell said, I didn't do it. They made it all up. They're liars. Boom. Trigger the lawsuit. As you know, as a lawyer, you flipped a switch. It might not seem that way to lay people, but there's like magic words you should not say unless you want things to get real and real quick. So then there's a defamation lawsuit. The problem was that the entire case file was sealed. And in the United States of America, if you do mediation, then nobody has legal standing to interfere with your private mediation or arbitration. But if you choose to go forward in a public court, it's called the constitutional common law right under First Amendment right of freedom of the press, that the public has a right to obtain these records, these judicial records, pleadings and other things.
Because of the nature of the suit or in any public suit?
In any public lawsuit. Yes. Now, there can be redactions as to Social Security numbers, credit card numbers, maybe certain specific information, but the entire case file was sealed. I'd never seen anything like it as a lawyer. Lawyers I talked to had never seen anything like it. Entire 56-page motion for summary judgments just said page redacted. And that was that. You had no idea what was going on in the case. So I filed what was called a motion to intervene and then a motion to unseal, 2 motions. The motion to intervene would say, hey, I'm Mike Cernovich. I've broken some pretty big stories. I've done some journalism and I want to find out, and I've done journalism on people like Epstein, and I want to find out what this case is about. What are in these records, right? So I have a legal standing to obtain these records because I'm a member of the press, and quite frankly, any person probably could have intervened. But because I had done documentaries on the news and, I've broken some stories, you put that in the pleading, you say I have legal standing to obtain these records. And then I say, therefore, after you conclude I have legal standing, unseal these records.
Okay. And let me just stop you right there. You know that the lawsuit is going on because it's in the news?
No, somehow my lawyer was tipped off to it.
Okay, so you find out about this lawsuit involving Ghislaine Maxwell and
Jeffrey Epstein and Virginia Roberts and
who was it? Virginia Roberts was suing Maxwell for defamation.
Let me make sure. I'm really bad with names, which you'll learn. So there had been some press coverage. So I'll go Ghislaine Maxwell and here I'll find it. But it was Virginia Roberts and people close to her.
Okay.
In the case. So yeah, I don't know if it was exactly Virginia Roberts or I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it was Virginia Roberts. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just confirming this.
Virginia Roberts is suing Maxwell for defamation because Maxwell said she thought she lied and made up the whole thing.
Exactly. I had nothing to do with this. I don't even know you. You're just a liar, a fraud, and that went beyond the exculpatory no. So if Ghislaine Maxwell had just said, I never did anything to help Epstein, that wouldn't have triggered the falsifiable statement of facts in a way that you could be saying that you're accusing them of something specific, right? So if I say, Viva, you're you committed, murder or whatever. I mean, you could sue me for defamation, but we're just so hypothetically. So if I just accuse you of that, you would say, no, Mike Cernovich is a fraud. And I would never did that. And then I'm like, well, no, actually you did. So I'm going to sue you for defamation for calling me a fraud because now you're defaming my good name. It's quite tenuous as a legal theory. And usually those types of defamation cases don't go forward. But this one, involved a sensitive issue. And so it was going forward. So then you move to intervene and then you move to unseal. So the judge said that I had standing to sue, and then he denied my motion to unseal. Said,
okay. I'm bringing up the comment with Dershowitz because from what I understand, Dershowitz also made a motion to unseal.
Joined mine.
Okay. So right. No, actually, sorry, we just skipped a step. So you either get tipped off or you know that the lawsuit's going on.
My lawyer emailed me. Yeah, my lawyer emailed me and said, "What the heck?"
And he goes, "Any idea what's in there, or you're just curious and you want to see what's in there?"
Well, it involved Jeffrey Epstein, and I'd had an interest in Epstein. This was again back in 2016, right? He's a household name now, but if you go look at Google Trends, Jeffrey Epstein in 2016, right? He was nobody knew basically who he was, but I was one of the few people. Alex, a few others who were interested in it. And this was sort of an indirect way of getting records involving Epstein. So then what happened, which has made my life, I don't want to say hell, but it's one of those things that's it's very difficult to explain the truth to people because of the way it looks. So I filed motion to unseal and motion to intervene and unseal, lost. So then, but when I was filing a motion to unseal, Dershowitz joined my motion as an intervener. Now, because he said that he had an interest in the case because he had been accused by Virginia Roberts of molesting her and other people. So then he joined my motion to intervene, but I couldn't stop him from doing that. Like you could have, well, you're not an American, but anybody could have joined my motion. You just file a piece of paper. I hereby join the motion, and then you're kind of stuck together with the person.
They join the motion as drafted. They have no amendment rights or anything. They just say, I like his motion, hook me up to it. I'll plead it if he decides to drop it.
Right. So then because of that, people go, oh, you worked with Dershowitz. And to a non-lawyer, and it's like frustrating to explain to people. It's like, no, he joined my motion. Like, so you worked with him. It's like, no, I couldn't not let somebody join my motion. So he joined my motion. Judge ruled against him, me, whoever would have joined it. And then we went on appeal. So before the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. While my appeal was pending, lo and behold, the Miami Herald files a motion to intervene and a motion to unseal using the same arguments that I'd had. So that's when, they say in life, like shit got real. That's when shit got surreal for me because now I'm in litigation with the Miami Herald who had now filed a motion saying I should have gotten all the records. The judge granted, so Julie Brown, the Miami Herald filed their motion, intervene, motion, unseal. The judge denied their motion as well. So their motion, so they went on appeal. So now we have two appeals pending in the Second Circuit, mine and Dershowitz because he joined the motion and there's nothing I could have done about that. And then Miami Herald's, and then the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, it's called consolidated. So for judicial economy and the proper use of resources.
Same questions of law, same file, put it together, exactly. Have the hearing date at the same time.
Exactly, yeah. So they consolidated the appeals. So then it was Cernovich, Miami Herald, Dershowitz, which was kind of weird for me because
you're the only person with no real interest in it, but you're just a nosy person who's getting involved.
Maybe nosy maybe isn't the right word, but somebody interested in these things. And if you wanted to go actually psychologically, which you kind of did a little bit earlier, psychoanalysis, you might say that I did this stuff now as a redemptive measure for other terrible things that I have said. Right.
Well, let me stop you there. I think if I'm going to get real psychological, that this is what you want to do. You want to be recognized as a legitimate journalist with credentials, but you're being bogged down by the stupidity of your past. That's what I would think. But not that you're doing this this is what you want to be doing, and you just nailed it with this, but now you keep getting bogged down with your history. That's like analysis.
And that would be a great analysis. And I've always told people the hardest person to tell the truth to is yourself. So I would not even be able to argue with that necessarily, because our own motivations are often not blind to us. So yeah, it could be if you were just looking at it from like the way you would or I would as a lawyer, you would say, oh man, this guy found a thing that he can like try to redeem himself for, and he's with the pizza stuff and all this will kind of vindicate all this other stuff, and we got to be careful and not give him a pass for this, which was interesting, because Julie Brown tweeted out, I'd never been in a case where the judge asked about slut shaming, because the judge actually asked my lawyer, is your client just some kind of troll slut shamer, trying to punk the court or something like that. So you might be a journalist like that's the first. I've never been asked about slut shaming in a any kind of lawsuit, let alone one in the Second Circuit. So yeah, so lo and behold, the Miami Herald, and I'm in the case, and then legally the judge says I should have won. And if we since we're being nuanced, Dershowitz wanted 3 pages. The Miami Herald wanted the whole enchilada, every deposition, everything. I only asked for the summary judgment records, and because I didn't think you could get the whole enchilada. So I'm the only litigant who got the specific relief requested, which was the summary judgment records. And then I'm like, okay, you're reading all these stories, and everybody's like, Miami Herald wins. I'm like, fuck you. Fuck you.
So explain what the summary judgments are. What judgments had been in the file that you have summary judgments of? Oh, I'm sorry. Summary judgments are small judgments on interim motions? No.
So the United States litigation system, if you sue me, the first thing I'm going to try to do is file what's called a 12B6 motion to dismiss as a matter of law.
For failure to state a claim. We've done a few of those on this channel.
Yeah. So we go through that, we go through discovery, and then I say, look, even if what they allege is true, they can't prevail at trial. So therefore you ask for judgment as a matter of law. And in other words, even if the facts are true, here's what we have, you can't make a case. So that's the document where everybody has their strongest arguments, right? Because you're here's my exhibits, here's the pages and the depositions that help me. It's the best. If you want to just read a case and understand it, you read the summary judgment motions of the parties. And so you're moving for judgment as a matter of law, or called JNOV. So you file a summary judgment motion, and then the other side files their opposition to your summary judgment motion, and then you file your reply brief to their opposition. And that's like the highlight reel of the case, right? And so that's what I had sought. And the Second Circuit Court of Appeals said, okay, yeah, you can have the summary judgment record. That's what everybody can have. Dershowitz asked for too little. The Miami Herald, they asked for too much.
Does the summary judgment include all pleadings and judgment?
No, it only includes so it would be your strongest case before a judge, where you've already gone through discovery and you've already deposed people and you've already done interrogatories. So you've already done all that work, and it's your story of the case. So the defamation case should be dismissed, because here's the depositions or the defamation claim. Here's the depositions. Here's the highlights. That no reasonable jury could conclude that what I said or did was defamatory.
Okay, then and that's just to understand what the summary judgment I can understand on the facts of what it is, but it makes reference to any depositions, it makes reference to any evidence. So included in the summary judgments that are authorized are the underlying exhibits and depositions as well, or no?
Yeah, because you would attach those as exhibits.
Okay.
Yeah. So you wouldn't get the full deposition. You would get
the relevant excerpts for the purposes of the summary judgment.
Exactly.
Okay, so this is amazing. So you get this. I understood from something I read that you gave it. Was this what you gave to the Miami Herald so that they could break the story because no one would take it seriously if it came
that
from
was
you?
John Conyers' sexual harassment lawsuit. Yeah, that was a completely different,
So scrap that. So stick with this. So you win the summary judgment. You get this summary judgment. When do you read it, and what is your reaction when you're reading it?
Yeah, so everybody, because it became public record, everybody got the summary judgment records at the same time. And what it showed was the network was just not Jeffrey Epstein. There was a lot of moving parts to what he did. It wasn't just he would go find girls who were 15 and be like, hey, you want to hang out with a 60-year-old man and give him massages or something, right? Like you had to have women who would go out. So he would have people go to spas, so you're a customer as a spa. It's usually women. Ghislaine Maxwell was accused of being the primary one, but he had a whole network of people who were part of that. So it showed that, it wasn't just one guy, Jeffrey Epstein, who did one thing one time. This is something that had been going on for years, if not decades. And the main thing that happened that blew it all open, and this will be, people will call this coincidental, but I know way too much about the law to call it that, which is right after the Second Circuit Court of Appeals said, all right, the records have become unsealed. 2 days later, the Southern District of New York indicts Epstein in a criminal case. And I think that's because for a number of reasons that we can go into if you want to, they didn't want to indict him criminally. And a lot of people were hoping that this just kind of went away, because a lot of people, members of royalty, as we now saw with those ABC footage from Project Veritas, I mean, ABC executives killed the story in 2015. There are just, for whatever reason, a lot of powerful people who didn't want this case to get more attention or more prominence. But once the cat was out of the bag, so to speak, with the civil filings, the criminal prosecutors couldn't ignore it anymore, and they had to take action.
It's very interesting. Okay. And just to get back to something, a question I had on the Dershowitz connection, people think you worked for him or he worked for you. I mean, he was never your attorney. You never paid him.
No, he was right. So yeah, he was in a movie of mine, Silenced, about free speech. I didn't pay him for it. He didn't pay to be in it. A film that it did in 2015 that had Candace Owens was in it before she was Candace Owens, Dave Rubin, rabbis. We wanted to talk to a bunch of people. We actually had a legitimate neo-Nazi in there, a guy by the name of Weave, who did The Daily Stormer. So we wanted, this is a film about free speech. Dershowitz had done a lot of work defending Nazis. So you're like, okay, I mean, this guy's a Nazi. What's your take on that? And then people, play that up. Oh, you have all these connections. Like, well, I mean, he was in a film and, 75 people were in the film. And then, to be very clear, if this were a deposition, he's never paid me a dime, never asked me to do anything in the case. I wish, the conspiracy theories were true, because I would have a ton of money from Mossad and apparently everybody else who was allegedly, helping me do all this stuff. But yeah, no thing of bargain, no thing of value, direct or indirect.
All right. And now, I mean, I don't want to ask anything that I have no business asking or you have no business disclosing. Dershowitz was asking for the motion. Did he make his own arguments?
He asked for, he joined, he only wanted 3 pages that he said would clear him of the charges. And the court said, no, you're just self-interested party. So he was not allowed to get the relief sought initially, because he was just, in a way, like he wanted to cherry pick things. It wasn't a sincere thing that he looked for. And I filed for the motion for summary judgment because that's the highlight reel of the case. Mm-hmm. And I also didn't think the court would unseal everything. And the Miami Herald, and that was proven, because the Miami Herald, when they tried to get everything unsealed, it was not. So yeah, another thing to bring up is, so the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press filed an amicus curiae brief in support of my case. So all these theories, so amicus curiae is called a friend of the court brief. And what that allows is public interest groups to do is say, this is a case of considerable legal significance, and we're filing to, as a friend of the court, a non-party, to just kind of tell you the law, the lay of the land. So one is there's no connection to Dershowitz asking me or me doing it to help him or anything like that, direct or indirect. And then two is the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press joined my thing on appeal in an amicus brief. The Miami Herald, they said I deserve these records. So there's nothing to it. But because people don't know that anybody can join your motion, it's hard to just say, like, well, I know he's on there, he's on the paperwork, but he filed a motion to join my argument. There's nothing I could have done about that to stop that.
That's interesting. And so, and just to make sure that point is totally clear, once he joins to your motion, if you decide to withdraw, he can say, I'm sorry, Cernovich is out and I'm keeping his motion as my motion.
That's a great question. That'd be a law school exam question. And the answer to that is, I don't know. So yeah, if I had withdrawn my motion, would he have his own separate legal interest because he said, well, I made those arguments by reference and therefore I still have a case? So I think he still would have. If we were just off the top of my head, I'd have to check the federal rules of appellate procedure.
I mean, it would make sense also so that he wouldn't have to refile and get the same authorization you had. You need to obtain authorization to intervene.
Well, you filed the motion to intervene. So he just filed one joining mine.
Okay.
Yeah. And then
no say in drafting, editing, or modifying.
Nothing. And yeah, so no say in that, and no, like one theory was that he was propping me up or something, and no, he wasn't. And I've been quite critical of Dershowitz, which is why the thing is bizarre. The way he's gone after Julie Brown and other people, I think makes him look like a kind of a shady dude. So, I mean, and I would say this under oath, under penalty of perjury, absolutely no connection, other than to the extent that he joined something that I had done, and there was no way to not let him join me.
Okay, so you get the release of the documents, and then it was how many days later that Epstein was indicted? Okay,
so we didn't get the documents, but the court said they issued an order to release the documents. Epstein was indicted either 2 or 3 days after that. So 48, or somewhere between 36 and 72 hours later, news broke that he was taken into custody in New York on a flight back from Paris.
And was there a date was the indictment dated that the 2 or 3 days, or was it predated?
It was unsealed. Yes, I'm not. It was. Yeah, that's a great question too. I don't know how they dated the document. I would have to check that. I would have to check that too, because I in a way I get what you're getting at, which is how do we establish causality that it was the release of the civil records that triggered.
Well, no, you know what? That wouldn't even make that much of a difference to me, because even if it would be just more suspicious, or it would just be more interesting if the indictment was predated this and it was then acted upon shortly afterwards, than if it was. I guess it's just out of curiosity, because it would affect your interpretation one way or the other, but it wouldn't change anything.
Right, but and I have a lot of I don't want to go into necessarily conspiracy theory per se, but the way that the criminal case was charged against Epstein led me to believe that it was more of a damage control containment indictment. So if you want to talk about that, I can talk about it and in a way that's, I think, maybe helpful and useful to people. But if that's beyond the scope of this conversation, I'll respect that too.
Let's go for it for a couple of minutes. We'll see. And the only reason I'm reluctant is because there's the legal aspect, there's the law, then there's the political, then there's the hypothesizing. And it's not that I have anything against hypothesizing and coming to my own opinions, but that I like to leave to other people on their own time. But let's hear it.
Okay. So are you familiar with something called the Mann Act, MANN Act?
No.
So, okay. It's very easy to understand. Under the Mann Act, if you transport anyone under 18 in interstate or foreign commerce for the purposes of a sexual activity, then you're guilty of the Mann Act. Epstein,
then I did know what it was, but not by name.
Right. So if you read the Epstein indictment like a lawyer, you're saying, why was he not charged under the Mann Act? The entire case, and this was shown in the summary judgment record, was he would fly these girls to New Mexico. He would fly these girls to Little St. John's Island, into Florida and to New York. The only conduct he was charged with in the Southern District of New York was that he would pay girls $300 to give him nude massages and sometimes to, give him a finish or, whatever you're going to call that. Bare bones stuff. There were no unindicted co-conspirators, even though, so why wasn't Ghislaine Maxwell indicted? Why weren't the people who helped him get the women that we now know from summary judgment motion? There was a very extensive network of people involved. They charged him with literally the least amount of misconduct that you would charge him with, which was they limited it to what happened in New York. So then what happened is people were at the press conference were like, well, hey, why didn't you raid the Florida place? Why didn't you raid Little St. John's Island? They go, well, we didn't have jurisdiction because we only charged him for what happened in New York. And no, that's bullshit, because he could have been charged under the Mann Act. There's ample testimony, and that's all now in the summary judgment record. He was absolutely flying girls all over the world and all across the country who were under 18 to have sex with him, and he wasn't charged under the Mann Act. And nobody has given me a satisfactory answer for why Jeffrey Epstein was not charged under the Mann Act.
It's very interesting. Okay. Let's see here. We got a super chat. April 68. Thank you. Cernovich, why did Dershowitz say on the courthouse steps after the unsealing that you were some kind of opera chick?
That's actually false. Dershowitz was asked specifically if he had any connection to me. And this is all the contemporaneous reporting will reveal this. The Miami Herald and Julie Brown wrote about it. And he said that he wishes that I hadn't been involved in the case because my involvement in the case was sullying his good reputation. So that is actually either a good faith misunderstanding of what had happened, but contemporaneous reporting will show that he said that he wished that I hadn't been involved because, I'm compared to him and what he's accused of, quite credibly for that matter. Somehow I'm, bringing down his good name.
That's interesting. So ultimately, I mean, it's an interesting thing that I don't think I ever fully appreciated. It was only as a result of the unsealing that the indictment occurred, but nothing ultimately. I mean, what ultimately became of the documents, the summary judgment that you obtained after the unsealing? Did they serve any purpose?
Well, they led to a lot of follow-up reporting. So there was, there's a number of people, a hotel person in France, and it did two things. One is it identified a couple of bad actors, and that was done in follow-up reporting. Two is it just showed how extensive the network was, which provides support for my hypothesis that that Epstein was in fact some kind of intelligence asset, and that's why when SDNY indicted him, it was just the most bare bones thing that they could have indicted him for, and then lo and behold, Epstein commits suicide. So if you look at things, everything that happened in this case was an absolute irregularity. People who have been doing law for 50 years never seen anything like it. Everything was completely bizarre. So without the kind of scrutiny, and again, I always say I was the first domino. Julie Brown was like the next 99, because when my case was pending, I was like, hey, journalists, like this is kind of a big story. Look at it. The only person who wrote about it, there was one article in Politico. He's a very kind of wonky legal journalist. So it was like, it would be the kind of thing that he would find interesting because he was into it. But the media ignored my initial efforts to write about Epstein and get these records. But then once Julie Brown came in, and also she came in because Alexander Acosta was the federal prosecutor who gave Epstein that pass, and Acosta was a labor secretary. So I'm the cynic in me, not Julie Brown. I think she's amazing, but the cynic in me tells me that the national press would not have actually cared about this case if Alexander Acosta hadn't been working for Trump as a labor secretary. Okay,
let's see what we got here. I mean, it's amazing. I have a question after this one. Epstein was a great violator of the NAP. Okay, in anarcho-capitalistic private, I'll let everybody read this. There was no question, but thank you very much, Elinars. And we got one that looks to be in pounds. Ask Mike if he was investigating Epstein to try and dig up dirt on Democrats or if he was trying to expose pedophiles.
Yeah, fair question. The answer is that going into it, Epstein was allegedly good friends with Donald Trump. So that case, if you read the Political article, Google that one weird case connecting Jeffrey Epstein, Bill Clinton, and Donald Trump, and that Political article. So quite frankly, going into that, it could have, I don't think it would have, but it could have absolutely implicated Trump. And I've reported on Republicans who have done this stuff. And if anybody has a great a story about a Republican, a high-level pedophile like Dennis Hastert, I was all over that in a way the media never was. I would love to break that story.
Okay. Now, the question that I had was, are any lawyers now teaming up, pushing the story, or teaming up resources, intellectual or other network to get to the bottom, to get more answers? Or is the sentiment the story, you're not going to get any more information out of this now?
So I'm, like literally, and if you ever, do read a book, or you can listen to my Guerrilla Mindset book, the audio book, is I don't believe in fatalism. I believe in seek your life vision, push forward no matter what happens, which is probably why I'm so successful despite baggage that would have dragged down most people. So I hate saying it, but when Epstein committed suicide, I said, they won. They won. Whatever they were trying to cover up, like, we'll just never know, or we're not going to know for 10, 20, 30 years. So I hate to be fatalistic about it, because I am a big believer in seeking your vision, even if it seems crazy to other people. But when he died, I just said, okay, they won. It's over.
From your perspective as a lawyer and a journalist who you want to push it, I mean, there's nowhere else to go right now other than hoping something comes up. Yeah,
just maybe just somebody gets something tipped off, or no, it's over. And subsequent reporting has kind of shown that nobody believes he committed suicide. Even ABC doesn't believe he committed suicide.
We saw that. Do you know James O'Keefe? Are you like friendly?
Yeah, I know him quite well. Yeah,
and no, I mean, this totally off topic now, but no, working with them, I guess you're too notorious to work with Project Veritas in any undercover or discreet sense.
No, I mean, actually, what I do is a little bit different. So when I get a big story, I give it to left-wing media, because then I know that it'll cross-pollinate in a way that it wouldn't if it goes into right-wing media. So, for example, when I got records about John Conyers, then a very powerful member of Congress, committing sexual harassment, I took those documents not to Project Veritas because I knew they would be dismissed and ignored, and I wanted the guy out. I gave them actually to BuzzFeed, knowing that that's how you get through the left. So we live in these thought bubbles and silos, essentially, where people go, oh, if James O'Keefe broke it, I don't want to talk about it. So when I get something really good, I actually I tip it off to left-wing media.
It's very interesting. All right. And, the one thing we didn't touch on was another thing that hounds you, which is the stories which you have pushed, which were wrong or unsubstantiated or discredited the other stuff that you did. What are the big ones that you actually got, until proof to the contrary? What are the big ones you got wrong?
Well, this is a complicated, nuanced question, and it's talked about in Hoax Movie, which is that when I was posting the hashtag, I'll spell it out so you don't get flagged, Pizza Gay, I was never talking about a pizza parlor. I was always like, Jimmy Savile got away with it, Dennis Hastert got away with it, Jeffrey Epstein got away with it, and I was posting the hashtag. So the way that I have been treated on that's unfairly, because I was referring to the hashtag as just these pedophiles have gotten away with it forever, and they occupy all these powerful levels of government. And then people tried to claim falsely that I was accusing a specific pizza parlor of doing, which I didn't do. And proof of that is I was never threatened with a lawsuit. I never had to issue any kind of quote unquote retraction for it, because I never actually said anything about them. Although there are videos deceptively edited. One thing I've learned over the years, and I'm sure you know this well, but I didn't know that I was ever going to become like a thing. So whatever it is I am, I'm like a thing, right? I exist. People care what I have to say. So I never thought people would like edit audio or, chop things up or slice and dice them into something. So they tried to slice and dice one video that made me identifying the pizza parlor. But actually, I was talking about how during the Deplorable, an event I had, an inauguration event I had, people met at that specific pizza parlor. So on this audio, I'm going, and they met at, and I named the pizza parlor. So then what people did, they took one video where I'm like, there's pedophiles everywhere, and they met at this place. But it was actually a video chopped up from a story about members of Antifa who had met at that specific place to meet. So there's a lot of things I just didn't know. Yeah, well, no, it's well, and also, you're
I say journalizing, but you're a journalist or you're delving into things where there's a lot of people who don't necessarily, who want to discredit you through whatever means. The funny thing is we're going to come to a point sooner than later where they're not going to need to splice stuff together. I seen Jordan Peterson's book on how to do things, which I won't repeat, the full deep fake voice audio you can have. It's going to be amazing. In fact, I think it was in the Rubin Report interview where he said, like as it is now, there's so little trust in the media. You read certain articles, you don't give them any credence, even if they are accurate, and you just assume it's all fake. It's gonna get to a point where we're gonna have that very same problem with the things that we're actually seeing with our own two eyes.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And feel free to cut me off if you're thinking I'm talking too much about unrelated subjects. But what I've noticed in my own lifetime is conservatives have gone from, if I read this article, it's going to be biased, to, oh, there's an article about Cernovich in the Huffington Post. That's not even true. That's been and liberals are the same way. They're just like, well, if I read it in Breitbart, it can't be true. Even though Breitbart's never been hit with a major defamation verdict, unlike a number of outlets, Washington Post, they have to go to trial, or at least they have to go through the legal system for Covington. So even though Breitbart is, they might be offensive in terms of your worldview, but they're not getting factual and correct details of the story. So it's gone to the point now where if you send somebody who likes me an article with me saying I killed somebody on Fifth Avenue, they're going to be like, well, that probably never even happened. It's probably a deep fake. And that's truly uncharted territory for democratic society and for the West.
No, it is interesting. It's when I saw the couple of the Joe Rogan deep fakes, I said, this is you're not even going to be able to have real-time video with someone and be 100% confident it's really what it is. Who's that? I was talking to somebody who said, just recently, with this ABC story, have lost their faith in ABC. Some of these, I was thinking, for me, a Canadian with a different perspective, I only really started noticing this stuff in 2016. I was oblivious before then, but it is amazing. It is amazing to lose faith in the actual journalism and the journalistic entities where, I still, Breitbart and Fox have their angles and they have their spins and they have their sensationalizing headlines, but you have to not believe anything and then put your own truth together through all of the pieces.
Right. It's a post-truth world, or at least shared truth, where you don't just think the other side is biased. You think that they're actually fabricating information. Now, we've never been there. Now, the flip side to that is that we all agreed that Iraq had WMDs, and we saw what happened. We all agreed that the Vietnam War was a very good idea, and we saw what happened. So we know that having a shared truth, because people pine for the days of Walter Cronkite and shared truth, okay, we had shared truth and we tried that and things ended up really nasty. And now we don't have shared truth. And, so when videos hit of, Assad gassed people in Syria, people are just like, we're not going to Syria, man. So, which in a way, it doesn't beg the question necessarily, but we're at the point now where if the media said Assad that dropped chemical gas on his people, he might have, but people are like, no, we just don't believe you anymore. So having a YouTube channel where we discuss these things, and even though I don't delve into these particular aspects of politics and news, you see what people think. You see all angles, and you see the next level where it's not even a false flag. It's a double false flag, or it's a triple false flag. And you see, once you have seen how absurdly outrageous reality can be, you can understand how people can entertain these ideas and which is why I'm sort of, I'm reluctant to even use the word conspiracy theory, because it's like all other words has lost its meaning. But once you see how outlandish reality is itself, you can't undermine these other ideas, and you can understand how people are have these beliefs now. Yeah, and we haven't gotten there yet. We're at, by we, I mean just collectively the people are. What do we do where you don't believe, so people don't have a shared truth on? Do you live in Toronto, by the way?
No, I'm in Montreal.
Okay. If you ever go to Toronto, there's this quirky bookstore that has a certain infamy to it, and so I went in and talked to the owner, and he's quite cantankerous. But people don't have a shared belief of almost any kind of big issue now, I think, and what that means, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Hold on, I got to read one from the Real Bambooga. Strictly to lighten the mood, did the pizza parlor actually have decent pizza? Okay, well,
I don't think I would like it. I've never been there, but I like cornmeal crust. If you're ever in San Francisco, go to Little Star Pizza. If you're Chicago, go to Luminali's. I like that thick cornmeal crust.
all right. Well, this is cool. I mean, I'm sort of following some of the comment section, but not all of it. Mike, what else was there? There was so you got the Pizzagate was the one that there. I just said it myself. I'm gonna have a problem. That was the one where the media, because I saw in the Vice interview they were railing on you for that. In the 60 Minutes, I think they were railing on you for that.
Hillary Clinton's health, they railed on me for.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. And which? Say that again.
And I stand by the reporting on Hillary Clinton, and in a way that I think is and again, you got to watch hoax, because I do go into that, which is the media says, well, the doctor didn't examine her. I'm like, well, you have all these people talk about Trump all the time, but doctors have never examined him. Oh, but it's okay. It's okay when you do it. And, so yeah, I stand by that. She was, had a neurological condition, and she passed out on 9/11, pneumonia. Well, she lied about just pneumonia. Oh, but then a kid hugs her. Oh, it was a special non-contagion pneumonia. Just go to hell.
The what I'll call it either the whataboutism or the double-edged sword. When they had that psychologist on CNN talking about Trump's mental state, no credibility any more than a doctor who's going to diagnose Hillary without meeting her. These are where the risk is that the risk is sucking and blowing at the same time as you're saying, well, the doctor that diagnosed Trump without ever meeting him is totally outlandish, but I'm going to cite a doctor who's never met Hillary for her diagnosis. You either have to throw both out or you have to accept both equally, which I don't think anybody's really doing, but that's politics.
Right. Yeah, that's again why I don't know. The frame of it all is they go, what about ism? I'm like, no, it isn't. Just they're both true. And I go, if you agree Hillary Clinton has a condition, I'll agree that. I mean, first of all, it's not too much of a stretch to, I think is what makes Trump a uniquely interesting character, is there's never been anyone that I've met who's as self-obsessed as Trump and who cares as little about things that would really bother a lot of us. The flip side is if he didn't have that characteristic, he'd have been broken. Just by the coverage and the attacks on him and everything else. So yeah, Trump is uniquely interesting neurologically, I think, in a way that I wish people had a more objective conversation on, which would be to say what I'm saying, which is if he weren't as, sick as he is, anybody else would have fallen down already. The guy does he look 73 to you?
Well, I was comparing visually him to Obama and him to Trudeau, but the reality is I don't think any of these politicians, or very few of these politicians, they have to have certain characteristics, because if I'm Trudeau, I'm not surviving the barrage of insults and attacks. And I don't know how they do it. They go on Twitter and post one of their policies, and I doubt they read anything, but if they did, yeah, I think they all have to have some sort of special personality to deal with it, because otherwise any of them would be crushed. It's probably why Winston Churchill drank a bottle of gin a day. Either they can't deal with it or they have ways of coping with it.
Yeah, you have to believe, and this is where the narcissism comes in. You have to believe that you can prevail against all odds, but that's actually an irrational belief to have about yourself, right? I believe that I'll prevail no matter what. Well, no, you won't. Like you're always going to hit a wall that you're going to smash through. But if you don't believe that you'll prevail against all then you're never going to be president of the United States, or in Winston Churchill's case, lead the nation through one of the worst wars of all time and become prime minister. But even after losing and then making a comeback, and like Napoleon, the same thing. He loses, makes a comeback, loses again. But if they hadn't poisoned him, he would have, he'd have tried to make another comeback. So if you're not mentally ill, you're never going to be historically significant.
All right. On that note, incidentally, if anybody in the comment section, if we didn't get to any questions that people are dying that I left out in the Epstein, it's the Epstein thing is actually very interesting, because I didn't appreciate that it was tangential, the release of the documents to the actual turn of events in the file. It's fascinating. I mean, I enjoy the first half of the discussion where people are going to form their opinion of you personally. They can hate you all they want. The second half in law is there's very few people who are going to say that they had this impact in journalism, but for stubbornness and tenacity were able to do it.
It was a good talk, and I enjoyed reading the comments, and people were like, I think it's interesting. I think people should be more vulnerable and open about mental illness and other things. Like, that's part of the stigma, is people are afraid to talk about that kind of stuff, and then nobody talks about it, and then they feel isolated and alone, and then that's where we get to where we are.
Well, it is an interesting thing. It's neurological issues are like much more core than physical elements. So people sometimes don't want to disclose if they have a heart attack for insurance purposes or for jobs, but the mental, there's the stigma that goes with mental illness and mental wellness. I prefer to call it mental wellness. It's real. I mean, it's real, and it's something to try to work around, but it's difficult because the reality is people react certain ways regardless. Joshua Cornelius says, we are in the midst of a propaganda civil war where the goal is the destruction of the opposition by any means available. Each side has to be more and more sensationalist to overcome all noise in the information overload age. We were talking about cancel culture earlier, and this, I agree with this to some extent, but I think we're maybe getting to the point where the tide is turning and people are just getting fed up with it on all fronts. But maybe I'm a naive optimist.
Well, there's a shift happening amongst the center. That's like for sure, where because it can only last for so long. You're like, okay, what do you do with this person? So like I think in a way an edge case where I'm somebody who has had baggage that most people would never get through. I've also done some things that are just objectively interesting that you can't right away. An example, the favorite article I ever read about me was the bad news is Cernovich isn't going anywhere. And that was right after the John Conyers story, where in the article was Cernovich is a terrible person. He spreads conspiracy theories, but he actually made a member of Congress resign by obtaining these documents about a sexual harassment lawsuit that nobody had ever actually seen. And the flip side to that, though, is the margin of error for me is like 0. So like, I'm very careful. I don't make any kind of jokes. I wouldn't go near, I don't even talk about relationship advice. I don't go near anything. And
it's an interesting thing is because like I've only seen your Twitter feed for the last month, and what I see on your Twitter feed, to me, it looks like someone who is trying to, I don't know if having had kids has really changed your perspective on life, if having had a girl has really changed your perspective on life. But, I see, which is why I'm always for the redemption side of things, but I see from your current Twitter feed, it's a totally different message than what your Twitter feed was in these articles I read. And, it's a radical change, but which is why it was interesting for me to see what all this controversy was once people started bringing it to my attention. Navazero, have you tried getting around Rag Funny? And okay, thank you, Nova Zero. I don't think either of us have tried that. I think I did.
But what you're touching on is the idea is that these people that you want to try to cancel, they're just like, people are still here. There's a line in politics: nobody gets killed in politics except for maybe Jeffrey Epstein. And what are you going to do with somebody that you believe said something terrible 5 years ago or 10 years ago, when there are other things happening that are like completely relevant? And other than complete and total ideologues, I think most people are realizing, like, life is complicated. Who knows what he means? And again, that's why I say, like, the things that you say when you're just like literally trying to troll, and you just nobody cares. Nobody's trying to, like, I've never called a gay person the F word, right? Nor would I ever, but I would casually say that word. Why? Because it was like trolling. It was like your friends, what are you doing? But once you have a certain platform, and I think that's the thing, you have to be more careful. So and I learned this the hard way, and that's why I mentioned I did apologize to a very specific person, K-File specifically, because my platform grew up before I knew how to use it. So I thought that I was just like talking a little bit of shit. And you realize, like, no. If you have like 500,000 people following you, you just can't talk shit. If you have,
it's the same learning curve that PewDiePie went through on a number of occasions. Let's see what we've got here. The Real Bambuga says, I have to disagree. Silence has become more golden lately than it ever was. Yeah, look, it's silence can rarely be a bad thing unless you need immediate directions on left or right. Look, I think we're good. This is good. I mean, let's quit while we're ahead. And I think anyone has any questions, you got like maybe a minute left to get them in. But this has been interesting for me. And Mike, it's what do you have next on your plans? Do you have to have some project in mind?
Actually, I've been just trying to get, back in shape, dude. I gained a bunch of weight. So I'm just primarily at the gym. My next movie, I have to decide what I'm going to do. So I might do a documentary on Epstein. I might do one on another project. But this year was, it's been a hectic 5 years, quite frankly. And the next, I kind of want to do everything I want to do now. I wanted to be kind of big, which is where I've changed. And probably is what's keeping me out of trouble. So the little kind of controversies that get people caught up, I don't feel like I have to talk about. I want like Epstein level stuff, John Conyers level stuff. I actually have a sexual harassment story involving a former member of Congress in the pipeline that might be coming out in like the next couple of weeks, which will, trigger a little bit more cognitive dissonance. So, because one of the things that came up when I broke the John Conyers story is, it was almost like, how can Mike Cernovich, who has said all these things, report on somebody else committing sexual harassment? And the answer to that is, if it's true, it's true, right? If it's true, it's true. But that would be the rational answer, but we don't actually live in that world. So that became a whole subplot to it, which is, I can't believe he broke that story. It shouldn't be allowed to. So if this next one does pan out and it looks like it's going to, then that'll reignite that conversation.
Well, it's very interesting. I much prefer reading the proceedings and breaking them down than actually. I'd rather analyze the situation after the fact. I would never want to be the one delving in to try to expose it. It's to each his own, I guess, to some extent. Richard Sprague, what is the best area of law to practice in 2019? Defamation, criminal. Are there any legal consequences for deplatforming? Good question.
So whether there's any legal consequences deplatforming, if you're really clever, there kind of is, but not as to a social media ban because of the Community Decency Act. And there's a number of reasons that there's not much you can do in the US, but that's, that could change. The best area law is a tricky question. I think it's good to just be near the money. So there's going to be a lot of changes in tax law and other areas. So if you just really wanted it to be the best area of law for the money, avoid criminal, because your clients don't have any money, right? Because the drug dealer money isn't what it used to be. And most people who commit a crime, it's not like you've saved money, because most criminality is due to poor impulse control. So it isn't like the guy is like, oh yeah, I murdered this person and now I have, 100,000 saved up because I'm a person who thinks through consequences. And litigation's kind of flooded. It's tough to make it. So tax law, if you have the brain power for it, the horsepower for it, and you want the money, that's where you should go.
Yeah, I mean, that's tax lawyers in Canada charge $800 to $1,000 an hour. It's to me, it's more painful than pulling teeth, which dentistry is another thing to avoid. The defamation and the deplatforming, there has yet to be like a big definitive lawsuit to punish these platforms, to punish these platforms for doing what they're doing. I think that's coming sooner than later, because I've just been reading YouTube's new rules, and these are not platforms anymore, and the time is going to come where there's going to be a precedent set that's going to dictate the behavior. But defamation is always going to exist. One thing I've learned through my vlogs is First Amendment lawsuits in the States are amazing, but I imagine not that the bar is low for entry, but a lot of people do First Amendment, so it's a competitive field.
Well, the problem with defamation laws is very, especially if someone's a public figure, they're super hard to even get past a motion to dismiss. And there's also something called anti-slap laws in most states. So in America, the general rule is you pay your own legal fees. Anti-slap laws makes it a loser pay kind of situation. So even if you have what you view as a pretty good defamation case, if you're in a state like California, Vegas, Florida, a number of states, then if they file an anti-slap motion against you, you're on the hook for the legal fees. So the economics of a defamation lawsuit change completely.
Yeah, that's. So I saw some comment here, which was, what's the most important change needed for law reform? Mike, you might have a better answer for that than me, but I know what I would think. But it would be about redrafting all laws so that they can actually be understood. But that might be too ambitious.
Yeah, I would say in criminal law, we should return to a more, if it's a morals-based crime, make them quite severe. But the regulatory apparatus to where you get tripped up and you don't even know what the law is. The law is actually unknowable. And that was my wheelhouse with crime and federalism, was that there have been studies done where, in the ABA, American Bar Association, others have said they literally couldn't tell you every federal criminal law. And these are legal scholars. And that's definitely a major problem. So we should have fewer laws, but the penalties for violating the laws should actually be quite severe. So sending somebody to life in prison for a drug thing, but then you commit homicide or something and you get a better deal, that should all be reformed.
Yeah, and in fact, one that I think is more specific to Quebec and possibly Canada is we don't have one judge assigned to a file. So every time you have to go to court on an incidental motion, you're pleading it to a different judge. Compared to what someone told me, the situation in California, Texas, I think you have one judge assigned to a file. So they
and the rocket dockets too. Yeah. So and there's a new thing. It's called a rocket docket, which is to avoid delay. They would try to get you to trial within a year. And yeah, it's the same judge, and they're pushing it and pushing the pace.
Yeah, that's the thing. That I mean, as far as we go in Quebec and Canada, delays are they're impossible. Okay, we got Real Bamboo. Go one more. And that's it. I know I'm going to get some hate for this, but I'd change jury selection to require at least one convicted felon in each jury. Are lawyers allowed being jury members in the States?
You can't be challenged for cause. So there's two types of challenges: peremptory challenges, which means you can challenge anyone for any reason other than a prohibited characteristic. So you can't say, I could say, I don't like your glasses, you're probably a hipster, I don't want you in the jury, but I couldn't say you're gay or black, and therefore you can't be on it. So lawyers are generally challenged, peremptory challenge, that's called, which means you don't have to give any reason. A challenge for cause means you have to show that you can't be impartial and unbiased, and you can't usually excuse a lawyer for cause unless there's a specific conflict of interest as to the subject matter in dispute.
Well, in Quebec, lawyers are not allowed not allowed being jury members. And I got my jury duty. I was summoned. I was so excited, and I went to court. And then I'm like sitting there reading the back of the thing. It says the following people cannot be jury members, and it was lawyers. So I just sat there to watch the event anyhow. Okay, let's do this. MK, the P score rating on YouTube. I did see that. I think they've eliminated the Mike. I don't know if you follow this, but YouTube was attributing P scores, or these scores, to videos and channels which would determine how they get placed and recommended. But apparently we can no longer find our P scores because they fixed that loophole. Okay, done. This is it. I'm going to tune off with them. Mike, we'll stick around. We'll say our goodbyes. But everyone, thank you very much for tuning in. Hope you liked it. And for those who thought this was a bad idea, maybe you appreciate better my ultimate motivation. I'm glad I did it, and I hope everyone got something out of it. Mike, you want to say goodbye?
Yeah, but I hope you all joined me, and a lot of people got mad that I plugged my book. And hey, Mike Cernovich, cernovich.com, CERNOVICH.com.
Nobody should get mad that you're selling your work. Everyone is entitled to get paid for the work they do. All right, people, peace out. I'm going to end the broadcast. Now I'm going to end it.